This call is now being recorded. Okay, welcome back everybody in this last session of the day. We are going through post-colonial criticism. In the previous session, we have seen that post-colonial criticism concerns itself with four important points. Uh, First is undermining the universalist claims. So it is like there is nothing like universalism in literature. That canon of literature is rejected. Yeah? Second is centrality on language, questioning the language, trying to redefine. And we have seen the example of how the very definition of colonialism in Oxford English Dictionary can be problematized, can be questioned, and we can try to read the absences, gaps in that definition, which speaks about the encounter or domination of the already settled people. Third important concern is about identity, and this identity is hybrid identity. It is unstable and a doubled identity. And we gave an example of W.B. Yeats as a colonizer as well as colonized. When he writes the poems in favor of Ireland against England, he is a post-colonial, a colonized identity rather than post-colonial, colonized identity. And when he writes Byzantium poems, he is a colonizer. He looks at towards Istanbul as a colonizer, and the exotic East is being portrayed there. So hybrid, unstable, double identity, and finally cross-cultural interactions. And in cross-cultural interactions, this process of adopting, adapting, and adapt. So how we choose to take the part of something from the other culture, including language and genre of literature, and then how we adjust and make required changes into that to make it our own, that is adapt, and then how we become skilled in that borrowed cultural identification, including either language or literary genre or fashions or clothes or whatever we consider as a part of that adopt, adapt, adapt. That is, we have seen in cross-cultural interactions. Now we see that there are we can divide this the movement of post-colonial criticism in three phases. Obviously, now we are moving towards we can say fourth or fifth phase. Also, we'll try to see the two articles which we are going to discuss, which will talk about fourth and fifth phase of post-colonial criticism. But here first three phases which we see up till 1990s, and then when we entered into this century, 21st century, we had a different phase. And by the end of second decade of 21st century, we can say that we are in a fifth phase of post-colonial criticism. So the last two we will see the contemporary dynamics in that, but how it can be recorded as what was going on in 1970s, 80s, 90s, when post-colonial criticism becomes something very interesting and eye-catching, and everybody's interested in looking all the literary text through post-colonial lens. That phase also has phased out. That phase has also phased out. So many people today might say that, are you still studying post-colonial criticism? It is out of date now. It is out of date. We have left all those things 20 years back. But then what happened in last 20 years? So that will put it as fourth and fifth phase. But here, without historical understanding of how the phases have moved, it will be very difficult to locate the advancement that happens in this criticism. Okay, so I would ask you to let me know that what do you see in this phases of literature. The material that is given to you, in that material we have compared this phase of post-colonial criticism with that happened in feminist criticism. In feminist, so we are trying to see the parallel in that. And you may also have a question that why this parallel, why feminist criticism is taken with post-colonial criticism. Yeah? So at that point we have to keep in mind that today it is very easy or very convenient to connect things with feminist discourse, so it becomes more understandable also. In what sense? In a sense like women or female as an identity had been a colonized identity. Now, who is the colonizer? Colonizer is patriarchy. Patriarchy is a colonizer. Now, patriarchy doesn't mean man, but patriarchy as a system is a colonizer. And what has patriarchy colonized? Then it is women's identity, female's identity, in their language, through their language, in their language. They have always put any reference to male, man, or man's body in a favorable aspect, and everything that is connected with women or women's body into negative aspect. So if you want to say a bad word, you will easily use any word pertaining to women's body or women's identity, and then that will become a bad word. You can't make a bad word with any reference to man's body or man's relation. You can't do that. So that is what is says that how you can colonize half of the population of the on the earth. Half of the population gets and then it gets so internalized by that identity that they fail to even question. They don't have a lens to see. They don't have that lens. એમને પણ પેલો મોતિયો ઉતારવો પડે અને એ મોતિયો ઉતારીને અને આ લેન્સ પહેરે તો પછી દેખાય કે these are the ways that one identity can be colonized by the other also. So that's why this phase is very important to see that how women can understand that how historically they are colonized, how the systems which we have to follow even today, the systems that we have to follow, how hegemonic structures operate, and even without any resistance, or even if you know, then also you can't do anything. Without doing anything, we have to be a part of those systems. One example I can give you, for example, the system of marriage, the marriage system. If you see now, in that marriage system, there is it is adjusted, or it is defined, it is written in such a way that women will have to leave the home and go to somebody's home. It is never a choice. It is not that either man or women. It is not like that. It is always a women only, irrespective of, even if you marry intercaste, and if you belong to an upper caste and your another partner remains to a lower caste. So normally we see in other power conflict that upper caste people will have an upper hand and the lower caste will have a lower hand. But in marriage, nothing like that. If you marry, even if you are upper caste, you are a girl, if you marry into a lower caste, then also you will have to go. You will have to go. So then caste, then you say material, money, capital. If you are very rich, then also you will have to leave. So as a rich also you don't have a power, as a caste also you don't have a power. So in patriarchal structure, whether you are Gora or Kala, whether you are this or that, whether you are rich or poor, whether you are this caste or that caste, this race or that race, the system works in that way that women will have to leave and go to the groom's house. That is how it operates. So people will have to question that who made this system, why it is like this, on what ground the systems are made, and whatever grounds were there, is there any possibility to change this system? Can we change this system? If the groom, એટલે પેલો ભાઈ આવીને જમાઈ તરીકે રહેવાનો હોય તો આપણો સમાજ એને ક્યાં સુધી સ્વીકારે? સમાજ એને જમાઈ રાજાઓને આપણે કેટલા સ્વીકારીએ છીએ, અથવા એ પણ કેટલી અપમાનજનક આઈડેન્ટિટી થતી હોય છે જમાઈ. So that also is that a right answer કે ચલો હવે આપણે રાતોરાત બદલી કાઢીએ બધું અને હવે છોકરીઓ સાસરે નહીં જાય પણ છોકરાઓ સાસરે જશે, છોકરાઓ સાસરે જશે, એવી સિસ્ટમ કરી નાખીએ તો એ શું યોગ્ય બદલો કહેવાય? તો you will say no, that again is not the right way of doing the thing. The right way perhaps is to give freedom to everybody, કે લગ્ન કરીને પછી તમારે જુદું જ રહેવા ચાલ્યું જવાનું, બંને કોઈએ ક્યાંય કોઈના ઘરે જવાનું નહીં, તમારે પોતાના ઘરે જવાનું, તમારે લગ્ન કરીને તમારા ઘરે જવાનું, તમારે નહીં પિયરમાં રહેવાનું કે નહીં સાસરામાં જવાનું, ક્યાંય નહીં, બંને જણા પોતાનું ઘર છોડી દે અને સ્વતંત્ર ઘર રાખીને રહે. પણ એના માટે તો બેય પાસે નોકરી તો હોવી જોઈએ, પણ હજી બંને તો હજી રવિવારની પરીક્ષા આપતા હોય, તેમાં પોતાનું ઘર કરે ક્યાંથી? ઇકોનોમિકલ ફ્રીડમ હોય, પોતાનું ઘર લેવાની ત્રેવડ હોય, એટલી આર્થિક તાકાત હોય, તો પછી આ સિસ્ટમ આવે. સો then it becomes necessary for boy and girl both to work. એ અનિવાર્ય બને કે બંને કામ કરે તો આવી કોઈ પસંદગી, આવા વિકલ્પ તરફ આપણે જઈ શકીએ. નહીતર જે વર્ષોથી ચાલ્યું આવે છે એ જ કરવું પડે. that becomes an easy option. અને આપણે કહીએ બધાને કે બહુ મહેનત કરો, વાંચો, નેટ સેટ પાસ કરવાની પણ તૈયારી કરો, પીએચડી કરવાની પણ તૈયારી રાખો, એમએ પણ સાથે કરવાનું છે. તો આટલું બધું કરું ના કરતા ક્યાંક લગ્ન કરીને ગોઠવાઈ જવું કેટલું સહેલું. આટલું બધું કરી અને પગભર થવું તેના કરતા તો ક્યાંક સારું સાસરું ગોતીને લગ્ન કરી લે એ કેટલો સહેલો ઓપ્શન છે. So people will prefer that. People will prefer the easy option. એટલે પેલી પરંપરા ચાલુ રહે, એ વસ્તુ એમને એ ચાલુ રહે અને બદલવી હોય તો વ્યક્તિગત સંઘર્ષ પણ ખૂબ જ થતો હોય. So but that systems tell us, institutions, marriage is an institution. When you study that, it tells us that still people are colonized within their own culture, within their own homes also. You may find that people are colonized in one or the another way. That's why this parallel with feminist movement is being given in this material there. Okay, so first phase. How will you tell about the first phase? So yes, who is it? Yeah, Daya, you are going to read that part.
Yes, sir. In its first phase, which is to say before it was known as such, post-colonial criticism took as its main subject matter while representation of colonial countries and criticized these for their limitations and their bias. Thus, critics would discuss the representation of Africa in Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness, or of India in E.M. Forster's A Passage to India, or of Algeria in Albert Camus' The Outsider. This corresponds to the early 1970s phase of feminist criticism, when the subject matter was the representation of women by male novelists like D.H. Lawrence or Henry Miller. The classic instance is Kate Millett's Sexual Politics. Thank you.
Okay, so in the first phase, out of the three stages that we try to see of post-colonial criticism, the first or very earliest stage, where we see that the main subject matter at this level was about representation of colonial countries by the white or imperial masters. Okay, the first phase we can say was like representation of colonial countries or colonial identities, yes, by the white writers or imperial mass, anybody who represents imperial masters or European imperialism. Okay, that becomes the first phase. And the parallel that is seen is in terms of 1970s phase of feminist criticism, wherein we were looking that how the men has portrayed women. So how D.H. Lawrence or Henry Miller used to portray women. That was that phase. So very famous work is Kate Millett's Sexual Politics. Kate Millett's Sexual Politics, wherein you discuss about male writer writing about female. Yes, that is the phase parallel to this phase where we see that how the white are writing about the colonized, how the colonizers are narrating the colonized. And that was the study in 70s here also. And so far as in this phase the literature is concerned, post-colonial reading is concerned, the works that we were studying was how Joseph Conrad or E.M. Foster, in their work like Heart of Darkness, yes, Heart of Darkness, or A Passage to India. A Passage to India. How in this work, this white writers, they talk about Africa or India. Yes, how they talk about this. Okay, so first phase, and I hope this point is very clear. Parallel with feminist discourse. So here you are seeing a famous work by Kate Millets, that how D.H. Lawrence or Henry Miller are talking about women. So you study male writer and how they portray female. Post-colonial studies, you study white writers and how they portrayed Africa or India. So that was the first phase of looking at post-colonial criticism. That was initially, it was done in this way. Okay, so let us see the second phase. What change happened in the second phase of post-colonial criticism? Okay. Okay, fine. So who is going to read about that?
I am, sir.
Yes, yeah, Nidhi. Yes, please read about it. Yeah.
The second phase of post-colonial criticism involved a turn toward the exploration of themselves and their society by post-colonial writers. At this stage, the celebration and exploration of a diversity, hybridity, and difference become central. This is the stage when, in the title of the well-known pioneer's work in this field, the Empire writes back, and this corresponds to the genotext phase of the feminist criticism, when this is the turn toward the exploration of a female experience and identities in book by woman.
Okay, fine. So now in this second phase, what change is coming here? Let us see. As you read in the material, yeah. Second phase, post-colonial criticism. Yeah. So what we see here is that there is a turn towards self explorations. Yeah, turn towards self explorations in terms of looking at their own culture, their own literary traditions, yes, their own language. Now, when I say their own, which obviously the right word also is to say our own. It is better to say rather than their, our own. When you read a post-colonial book written by the white person, he will use the pronoun their. But when we are reading, we have to change that their to our. So our writers started reading our own culture, our own literary traditions, our own language. And obviously in this phase there is celebration of diversity, yeah, and hybridity, and the difference. So you are not ashamed about being hybrid or being diverse or being different. You're not ashamed about that, but you are you are celebrating. You are self-exploring that, well, we are this now. Now with cross cultural interactions, we have changed. By coming in contact with other cultures, we have changed, and let us celebrate that change. Let us we have already adopted, we have adopted, uh, we have adapted to this. Now it is time to be adept in that, be skillful, be master now in all those things. That is that phase here. And the important work here is empire writes back. So now these people who were once upon a time under the empire, now these people are writing back. Now they are writing back. That is the second phase of looking at this year. And in feminist criticism, that goes parallel with Jaino text or Jaino criticism, where Elaine Sholter also writes a work, Elaine Sholter's work towards feminist poetics, towards feminist poetic. That is one of the major work, which if you want to see the parallel with the feminists, then going towards their own poetics, not only like telling that, well, we don't want to go with the poetics of Aristotle. Aristotle is a male writer, and we don't want Aristotle's poetics as such. But let us go in search of our own poetics, women's own poetics, towards their own poetics. That was Elaine Sholter in this phase that comes there. Okay, now the third phase, and who is going to read about it? Third phase.
Me, Khushbu.
Yes, Khushbu, yeah. Yes.
The analogy between these two. Sir, 1 minute. Okay. The analogy between these two types of criticism might be pushed a little further, so that a parallel might also be perceived with the split in feminist criticism between theoretical and empirical versions as suggested above. Thus, in post-colonial criticism, we might see a split between variants very directly influenced by Reconstruction and post-structuralism, such as the work of Homi Bhabha, and work like Said's, which accepts a good deal from liberal humanism, is written in a more accessible way and seems perhaps to lend itself more directly to political engagement.
Okay, fine. So, well, let us try to understand this. What we see in this third phase, or what happened around by the end of 20th century and the beginning part of 21st century. At that phase, how things 1990s, we can say here. Well, so in this third phase, of post-colonial criticism, parallel to the feminist criticism, we started seeing a kind of a split between theoretical versions of the discourse and the empirical one. and the empirical version of that discourse, that we started looking into this. Now this split, either in feminist discourse or in post-colonial discourse, is very much influenced by deconstruction, and post-structuralism, and post-structuralism. Yeah, it is highly influenced by deconstruction and post-structuralism. And in the works of so far as post-colonial criticism is concerned, we started finding this trend in one side moving towards Homi Bhabha, and the other side we start looking at Edward Said's reading there, which becomes more theoretical, and here you find more of empirical observations. Yes, empirical observations here. So in that way, Edward Said's Orientalism, the theoretical standing on post-colonial observations there, and Homi K. Bhabha's Nation and Narration. Which becomes more empirical observations about post-colonial thing. So that way, this third phase of post-colonial observation starts moving in this two diverse trend. Today, if we see, today, many people have started raising questions against the very proposition of Orientalism, which is very useful lens, but well, to some extent out of date also. Now, why that happens also? Why Homi K. Bhabha or Gayatri Spivak or Fanon, Foucault, they become more important rather than Edward Said? Because Edward Said, obviously, as a Palestinian a scholar, is taking a side of the Arabic world and trying to project. And sometimes it is read as a defense of this Islamic world. And it leads into an idea of Islamophobia is a project being done by the West and other thing. But on the other side, the empirical observations tell that, well, still many of these Arabic countries or the countries which are having Islam as a major religion, they are still involved in terrorist activities. It is whenever there are terror attacks in the world, people find their roots in some of the Islamic countries or some of the person that is involved with these nationalities also. So it is very much there. Now that reduces the very power of the arguments which are made that everything that the West is telling about the East is problematic. So that becomes somewhere where the new way one has to approach the examples that are given in Orientalism. So as a theoretical aspect, Orientalism is a very good observation, but so far as empirical or examples are concerned, we have to switch over to Homi K. Bhabha and his work, where he discusses more pertaining examples from the other works also. Okay, so these are three phases of post-colonial criticism which has developed up till 1990s, and then we have seen the fourth and fifth phase. And in that, we will study that the fourth phase was about study of globalization. The study of globalization was something very important to be seen as the phase is about globalization. So how post-colonial arguments will look at globalization, how this will question the new empire, that is United States of America, and how under this idea about globalization, the new control which countries like America will have over smaller countries, and how the new economical order which is established under globalization is normally questioned or was discussed. And finally, we come down today. Today, when we will discuss the article, we will see is about ecological concern. This becomes again one major concern today for post-colonial discussion also. So eco-criticism merges here into this, and obviously people see that if Earth is now to be saved, or if we see Earth is something that is colonized, then who is the colonizer? Who is the colonizer? So now you see, if Earth is colonized, then who is the colonizer? Whom we can say? Now see, we were seeing that the white colonized the world, the other world. We also have seen the parallel, men colonize the women. So in that sense, we were seeing. So if Earth is colonized, then who is the colonizer? Then how do we question this? That becomes important to be seen in this reference, in that. So this both these things we are going to discuss thoroughly in the two articles that we will discuss. Okay, so any questions then here? Anybody, any doubt or any question in this? Okay, fine. So then we end this session here with this. If there are no further observations or any questions to be made or any inputs also, if you want to give to this, then also you can say something about it.